Welcome to the Perrysburg Podcast, episode 32. I'm your host and Perrysburg resident, Kim Newlove. Today, we're talking about the Maumee River Walleye Run with Brian Miller from maumeeriverwalleyerun.com. If you are new to this podcast, welcome. The Perrysburg Podcast is an informational podcast for prospective, new, and current Perrysburg, Ohio residents. We talk about what's in Perrysburg and why people like to live here. If you like to fish in the Maumee River and catch walleye, you are going to like this episode. Many people who live in Perrysburg and visit Perrysburg love the Walleye Run. You can find the show notes for this episode on perrysburgpodcast.com. And if you'd like to see the interview, go on over to our YouTube channel. You can find that at youtube.com/@Perrysburg Podcast. All right. At this time, I'd like to read a brief introduction about Brian Miller, my guest, then we'll roll the interview. Here we go. Brian Miller is a Maumee River walleye fisherman with over 30 years of experience. He has spent tens of thousands of hours fishing in every river condition imaginable. This gives him the ability to teach others using his firsthand experiences. Brian is passionate about teaching new fishermen how to be successful and have fun with the sport. As an outdoor writer, Brian has published thousands of articles in national magazines and is always willing to share his advice to help fishermen. He wrote a comprehensive book titled Fishing the Maumee River Walleye Run, and you can buy your copy at maumeeriverwalleyerun.com. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Brian Miller. Hi, Brian. Welcome to the Perrysburg Podcast. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. We're talking about the Walleye Run, the Maumee River Walleye Run, as it relates to Perrysburg. I'm so happy to have you here. You are the guy to talk to, from what I understand.
Yeah, it's actually been great. I've fished in the river for a very long time, pretty much my entire life, and lived in the Maumee Perrysburg area for my entire life. So it's been a blast. The Walleye Run is just a fun time every year.
Awesome. And real quick, just so everybody knows where to find your info, I understand you have a website and a Facebook group. Would you like to talk about those real quick?
Yeah, for sure. The website that I have, it's maumeeriverwalleyerun.com. Super easy to find if you just plug it into Google search. And then also my social media is also, it's on Facebook, which is Maumee River Walleye Run also. And it's a Facebook page that you can like.
Thank you very much for sharing that. That is definitely what I did. That's how we met. I liked that Facebook page, and now here we are recording a podcast episode. All right, let's get into it. I would like to talk about where's good to fish in Perrysburg. Where can you catch some walleye?
Yeah, in the on the Perrysburg side, there is just a tremendous amount of great fishing, and what we could probably do is just walk down some of the locations. And for those people that haven't fished yet, oftentimes, as you guys know, the river is always a changing environment, right? And so the river comes up, when it rains. Doesn't need to rain locally. It can rain in Indiana or other places, in the river will rise and it'll fall. You always got to be super safe on the river, but do know that environment changes, and so all these locations change as you think about them. And so I think some of the popular ones, we'll talk about some of the real popular ones first. And on the Perrysburg side, there's a couple kinds of fishing you can do. You can jump in a boat. That's a little bit less popular. Most people like to fish the Maumee because they like to put waders on. You can also fish from shore too. But one of the really popular ones is Buttonwood, the Buttonwood Park there. That's a phenomenal place to fish, and that's phenomenal in all like heights of the river. So both in low water, also in higher water. It's just a really good place. There's nice parking there. It's a good park. There's nice deep holes all over in there, and there's usually bait dealers in that area too that you can get stuff from. So another one is our good friends over at the Schroeder's farms. That has been a campsite, and so if you're coming in town from out of town, that's kind of the place to go. It's really the only place that you can camp. It's a little bit more primitive camping, but you can go in there, camp for a couple days, a week, weekend, whatever you want. If you just want to go down there and park too, there's just a small fee. You can park and fish. And the Schroeder's area really gives you access to both upstream and downstream, and again, phenomenal at kind of all sizes of the river, like whether it's sorry sizes, all heights of the river. And then really close to that is Davis Park. Davis only has about 10 spots to park. So like that is one of those sought after. I know people go there. You got to get there super early. Honestly, I don't love to like fight the crowds in that particular one, but if you get there, you get early, you can get it. Otherwise, you just jump over to Schroeder's. It's really close by. And then I think everybody knows Fort Meigs. So Fort Meigs is just a really popular area. Now, Fort Meigs is awesome in all levels. But also Fort Meigs is really good in the high water. So I think that would be my tip to people fishing on the Perrysburg side is when the water comes up a little bit. The Fort Meigs is a pretty awesome place as the water starts to recede and come down a little bit. And we call it transitional water. It's awesome, super awesome. And there are deep holes over there, big structure, big rocks. Plus you get the Fort Meigs kind of scenery around you, which is just, it's just a fun place to fish around there. And then I think the last one really on there, at least for wader fishing, is Orleans Park. And in Orleans is it's a good location. So again, high water, phenomenal fishing over there. Even when the river gets, and you got to be careful when the river gets really high, you got to really know what you're doing. Just do know it's a river. It can be dangerous. There are things like the river can drop off and get into deep holes. So if you really don't know it, you gotta again wear your life jackets and be really safe. But Orleans Park is really good. What happens is when the river comes way up, the way the river kind of curves around the Orleans Park, it actually stacks a ton of fish kind of close in. There's lots of big rocks in there. It flattens out a little bit so the fish don't have to fight as hard in the current. And again, that's a great spot. But I'll say, even as the river starts to fall, you get to the transitional water and then you get to like a low water and it's still good fishing over there. You just got to lighten up your rig a little bit. And then for those people that like to boat fish, there's always the Riverside Park and the Maple Street dock to dock in and kind of come upstream. Because a lot of the fish really like the rapids area in the river. And so anytime you get a little bit of current, a little bit of riff raft and a little bit of rapids, that's a great place to start fishing if you're not sure where to go from. So that kind of gives you a quick rundown just to the Perrysburg side in itself. So
Any secret places that maybe a local may not know about that you could share?
yeah, so I think what's really important is to know that the river is public water, right? So anywhere that you want to go on the river, you're on public water. Now just make sure that you're in the water, right? So anywhere that you're in the water, you're good. And so even if the public land or the private land comes down to the river, you can take a boat up there and kind of dock it and jump out and fish, or stay in the boat and fish. That's great. There's lots of places kind of upstream. So if you keep going upstream past the Sidecut MetroPark that's on the Maumee side, and then there's the Jerome Rd on the Maumee side. So if you kind of continue to fish that all the way up, as long as you're in the water, you're good to fish. Phenomenal fishing up there, just phenomenal fishing. Just like a lot of places. Now you do have to work, right? Because it is a long walk, or a longer boat ride on there. And so that's what I would recommend if you kind of want to get away from the crowds. If you don't mind the crowds, I personally love the Orleans and the Fort Meigs. Those two locations are some of my most favorite places to go.
Nice. Do you kayak out there when you talk about boats? Are we talking kayaks, motorboats? What are we talking about?
Yeah, so most likely during the river, you'd want to run a smaller boat, like a little John boat. Now I do know there's like I personally have taken kayaks to get to certain locations. So if I want to get across the river, I normally don't do that in high water, usually in low water. But if I want to get from one location to another, I don't really use a kayak. I have kayaks, but I just haven't used them on the river as much. I do use a canoe, and that's been, really an all-time favorite of mine is to get to a place where nobody else is, especially on the weekends. I'll jump in my canoe. You'll find very, very few people that do that. So there are a few of us diehard guys, but very few people. But that's always fun to do that.
How long did it take you to learn all of this? You seem to be quite the expert.
Yeah, yeah. So it's one of those things. If you think about the river, so I have lived in that particular area my entire life. So when I was in high school, we used to fish, right? And so, what better things do you have to do in high school besides sports? And then you fish. So I would fish a ton. I was lucky that I had an older brother. He's about 10 years older than me, and he very much loved the river, still loves the river, and still fishes a ton. And in the river, as you think about it, a lot of people come to the river, and to me, it's almost like a homecoming, right? So everybody comes back. Everybody fishes in very similar spots from year to year. In every year during the walleye run, during that March and April timeframe, I come and I see, I mean, hundreds of people that live kind of all over the place, and I don't see them. I have friends that come from Iowa, right? And I only see them once a year. They come in from Iowa and they'll fish and we'll connect. And it's always good to see them. It's them come in, but a lot of people, just even local, you get busy with life. But when you get down to the river, you're there fishing for a couple hours, and you'll run into people. And so we have a really close knit, a bunch of friends. And again, it's like a homecoming. It's really fun.
That's awesome. I'm happy for you. I've seen all of the people on both sides of the river, Maumee and Perrysburg, and it's like 200 years ago. Men standing shoulder
Yeah.
to shoulder with fishing poles and pulling things out of the river. I think it's magical. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it is super it's amazing, right? It's amazing to know that, I've been fishing there for 3 decades, right? And there's some people that I've known for the entire time that I've fished, right? Like me knowing them is because of the river. And I think those are the experiences that I like the most. It's more than catching the fish. And of course you always want to catch fish, but it's you get to experience and you get to meet new people that you would just never would have met in your entire life unless you were fishing, because they're in different career paths than you. They live in different locations, right? But the river kind of brings everybody together. So
Awesome. Well, for somebody that's brand new, out of all of the locations that you mentioned just a few minutes ago, where would you tell a first timer to go?
yeah, so a first timer, there's a couple places. So if you want to fish from the shore, and the water's a little bit higher, Schroeder's is a good place to be, right? Because people don't wade out very far when the water gets high. So that's a good location. You really, I know people will put waders on and they'll stay in like ankle deep in water, but that's not, there's no advantage there, right? Like you could stand right on the shore. So that's a good place to go. Um, and then, so I think that's a good location. Now, the thing that you have to be careful of is really just watch where people are fishing. And so what I often tell new people, regardless of which location, go in and stand there and just watch the fishermen, right? Take 10 minutes and just watch the fishermen. You'll see where people are catching fish. You'll see where there's holes in the river where you don't want to walk, and you'll see how people access those locations in their waders and then come back out of the river. And so that 10 minutes will provide you more value, because even in that 10 minutes, you'll be able to say, nobody's catching any fish down here, right? But I saw a bunch of people catching fish up there, so you'll want to kind of stack on top of those people. So that's what I would advise anybody to do, is just take that few minutes. I know you're always in a rush. You're like, man, I only have so much time I want to get out there fishing, but just stop and just watch. That'll teach you so much right there.
Great advice, especially for first timers. You want to make sure that you find somebody who you can consider a mentor without having to call them out and, talk to them about it. But then also, off mic, right before I pressed record, you were telling me that there are some people out there who can help you cut the learning curve. Who might those people be?
Yeah, so some of the things that are really important, and so there are a lot of they're local bait dealers, right? And so they have little trucks, and they will park alongside the road. on all sides of the river and in many of the different access points. And I would even say Schroeder's, as you go to park in Schroeder's, right, they have a little bait stand, but they also know where all the fish are right there. And so I think the best thing is if you stop into those guys, buy a few lures from them, right? Spend a few dollars, ask them about the fishing. They are super honest. They're hardworking individuals. I know all of them very personally, very well, and they will always point out and say, "Hey, they're catching a lot of fish up here." They'll not only just tell you the location, they'll probably point you exactly where it is. And the other thing is they'll tell you the type of lure, the colors, the weight of that you should be using. Right? They're super honest people, and I would highly encourage that you guys, anybody that's new, I do it every time I go to the river, and I've been fishing forever, right? I still stop in and talk to those guys every single time because they just provide me, they provide me that on the spot, right? That was the guy that was standing there, not just for the last 10 minutes, right? He's been standing there for 8 hours and watching what was happening. So I think that's what I would do.
Good info. And the lures that they sell, they're good quality, right?
Yeah, they are great quality. And that's the thing about the Maumee River Walleye Run. It's such a unique fishing. There's such unique tackle, right? You don't really use that tackle in a lot of other places. So a lot of people that sell locally, they either made it themselves or bought from somebody that made it locally. So you're really kind of feeding into that local community, which I'm very positive on, um, and all good quality. When you look at the lures, so my recommendation on lures for anybody that's starting out, right? So there's a lot of different weight sizes to use and a lot of different lures. Um, and what I have found is don't go to the bigger size, go to the smaller size. So for me, a number two hook on a medium sized floater is perfect, but you can also go smaller. But smaller lures have hooks that'll bend easier. That medium size hook is actually a perfect hook. Same thing with weights, right? I tend to fish on the heavier side myself, so take that for what it's worth. But if you're not sure, just go right in the middle. And that's the other thing is as you get into the river, right? If you talk to the local guys that are providing the fishing, like the lures at the shore, they'll tell you what to use. But also when you get in the river, everybody's super nice, right? If somebody walks in next to me and they say, "What lure are you using? How long is your leader? What's the weight?" Right? They're asking me. I always tell them, right? Like I want everybody to catch fish. So I'll tell them where I'm casting. I'll tell them what I'm using. Um, Almost everybody, do the same thing, right? If you just turn to the guy next to you and say, "Hey, what are you throwing?" Right? I mean, that's all you got to say is, "What are you throwing?" And they'll tell you. So
Very cool. Now I'm going to talk like a mom for a second. Once you gentlemen are done with your fishing, and ladies too, you've got all these fish. Let's say you've got a dozen fish and you've got to transport them home. For
yeah.
anybody that's new, how do you transport the fish without getting fish guts and water all over your car?
Yeah, yeah, that's actually a great question. So I always do one of two things, unless I'm forgetful, which I am often, by the way. I usually just throw a cooler in the trunk of my car, or a 5 gallon bucket. Normally, one of those two gets me to what I need. And then the other thing is a lot of times there are local fish cutters around. So if you're new, I think the going rate is $2 a fish, right? So pretty inexpensive when you think about it, that you can actually have one of the local fish cutters actually cut your fish up. And there's people on both sides of the river, all over, that will cut your fish up, and they do a great job. Super clean cuts, fast, right? It's almost kind of worth it to go to those guys.
And for a gal like me who has never cut one of her own fish, would they teach me how to do that too?
So normally the fish cutters, there's usually a line, right? So they are incredibly fast. Now, would they teach you? I'm not 100% sure if they would, just because of the line. Um, I know if you stand there and watch them long enough, it's definitely easy. I know I have on a couple of my social medias how to fillet fish. I know a lot of the other guys do also. It's not incredibly hard. Um, so but like I said, the first fish you ever cut up, it you'll lose some meat and you probably won't do it accurate, and that's okay.
There's a first time for everything. I get
Yeah,
it.
absolutely.
Absolutely, yes. Now, we talked a little bit about these jig salespeople that are at the campground or along the river, but can you recommend for anybody in Perrysburg who wants to plan ahead and shop ahead, where would you recommend? Is there a physical brick and mortar store that you would recommend?
Th- There is actually one of the best places to go is to Maumee Tackle. They're actually on the Maumee side. And the reason why I would recommend them is they have all of the local lures. They will sell them at a discounted rate over top of one of the bigger box stores around, right? And so really, really good. And they'll also tell you what colors are working at Maumee Tackle. So the people at Maumee Tackle, they're just pretty amazing people. They put out also some fishing reports kind of on a daily basis. And I just appreciate, like, if they weren't there, right? If their brick and mortar wasn't there, people would struggle to get lures in mass quantity, right? And so I think to me, again, I get a lot of my lures from those guys.
Very good. I appreciate the recommendation. Sometimes people that are just getting started, they don't know about these things until they hear it from somebody who turns out to be a mentor in a podcast. This is
Yeah,
good
for sure.
information. Absolutely. Well, at this point, I know that you have a lot more information to share, and you've told me that you have actually done a talk at Way Public Library. What are some of the things that you talk about when you're a guest speaker there at Way Public Library?
Yeah, so a lot of the things that that's really critical, right? So you could talk about like lure size and where to throw and all of those things, right? And probably some of the most important things, right, is being able to read the river. And what you'll see is the fish like to sit in pockets. And so if you can read the river, read the ripples and kind of look through that. I go into a lot of details. I have a book on the topic and I go into some of those details. So what I would say is for anybody that's new, if you look at the river, the first time you look at the river, what you'll see is just a river, right? But if you start to look at it really closely, you'll see what I call slick spots. And so it's a calm spot. And wherever there's a calm spot, there's actually a deep hole underneath that. And if there's a big ripple and then a calm spot, you have a big rock and then a deep hole. And so I would cast right on that big rock so your lure kind of goes through the deep hole. And then the other thing that's really, really critical is keep tension on your line. Make sure you can feel, right? And so oftentimes what happens is if you don't have a good rod and you can't feel that fish bite, you'll lose a ton of fish, right? Because a lot of times they'll grab it or it'll slide through their mouth, or there's lots of ways that you catch fish. But if you're not able to like feel the fish and set the hook, you'll lose a ton of fish. And oftentimes the setting the hook and feeling the fish is the difference between, one fish and a stringer full. I mean, it really is. It's phenomenal. And you'll see that most predominantly is when the wind kicks up, the guys that are really, really good, they walk home with a limit and everybody else will not. And that's like when you look at the guys in the river, there'll be 20 guys with one fish, right? And you have that one guy with 6 or 5 or 4, whatever the limit is that year, right? And so that's the difference, is being able to feel that line and be able to really pay attention. So that's probably one of the most critical pieces. And if you're not sure, what I always tell people is hook sets are free, right? If you're not sure, pick up your rod and if there's a fish on it, great, yank back. But if you just run it every time and don't try to set a hook, you're probably missing, right? Because there's a lot of fish in the river right now. Or not, there's a lot of fish in the river, and if you cast 25 times, right, and you don't have a bite, then I guarantee you've missed a number of them along the way.
Oh, it's risky, huh? If you don't know what you're doing,
Yeah.
it's risky.
It
I,
is.
what does that feel like when you come home empty-handed? Has it ever happened to you?
It has, I mean, there is lots of days, right? There's lots of days where it's phenomenal. You'll just catch a lot of fish. And for those people that struggle, right? So if you're new to the walleye run, just there'll be a guy next to you, and it's always like this. There's a guy next to you catching them, and you can't catch them, right? And that's frustrating, right? It kind of hits your pride, but that's okay. And so I do know that everybody has good days, everybody has bad days, but what happens is as you fish the river more, and particularly if you fish one location more, you start to understand that river. You start to understand what it feels like, right? You'll know when your lure hits that rock, you're like, yeah, that's that rock that I hit every single time. And then when something happens in between, you'll know it's a fish. And so just do know the more you do it, the more you become in tune with your equipment, the more but you become in tune with the river, and you get better at it. And I know some guys, they are just, when you hit the core of the run, they will catch limit after limit after limit. They'll do it incredibly fast. And then you have new guys that have never been out there, right? And they get frustrated. Don't get frustrated. Know that that guy has, years and years and hundreds of hours in that thing. And anybody that does something that much, they're going to be an expert at it. So, so definitely. And even when, and everybody goes home empty handed from time to time, it's going to happen. So it's happened to me plenty of times.
I appreciate you mentioning that because there's going to be at least one person listening that says, I I only get one chance a year and sometimes I walk away empty-handed, so it's good for them to know that it happens to you as well.
Yeah,
And
it does.
I want to say just as a human, comparison is the thief of joy. So be careful comparing yourself to other people. It's just like with anything else. Comparison can be the thief of joy.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing. So I have many children, right? And so I've transitioned in my life right now to so I have four boys, and I am teaching them the walleye run and how to fish, right? And so and you'll see that in young people, but oftentimes people forget that older people do it too. So like a good example is my dad picked up walleye fishing after my brother and I had fished it for 2 decades. All right. And he struggled to catch fish. And that's okay, right? Like he just didn't do it as much. And but you have to remember that you have to teach somebody how to fish. It takes a while to kind of get into it and to really understand it. And even my kids, right? So my kids have done a great job and they've learned along the way. And I still remember, like I remember the day, and I remember this very distinctly. So my brother he's 10 years older than me. He is just a phenomenal fisherman, just hands down phenomenal, right? Like, and I still remember the day when I was young that I outfished him, right? It was the hugest moment in my life because he had mentored me along the way. Um, and I felt like I had hit that moment in time where I was no longer like learning on every single cast, and like I was actually starting to put the things together, and it takes a long time. And so I see that out of my kids too. As I take them fishing, they're putting things together, and they're like remembering the experiences that they had and what they should do differently. And everybody, even as an adult, should learn that too. Is hey, there's going to be a lot of times where you walk home empty-handed. I know guys that walk home after an entire season and they have zero or one or two fish. Don't get discouraged. It's actually that's okay.
I appreciate those stories. I was excited when I heard you outfished your brother. That's pretty cool. I have an older sister, and there are some things that I do better than hers. There's some things she does better than me. So I know that feeling of sibling rivalry.
Yeah, I'd love you set the record straight. He normally outfishes me. He's a great fisherman. So, but I do remember the first time that I ever did it. So a lot of times it's back and forth now. So,
I get it. I get it. What is it
yep.
like to catch that first fish of the season? First walleye of the season?
Yeah. So oftentimes, and so I'll give a tip on a little bit on timing, right? And so right now, as we're recording this today, right, there have been people catching fish in the river. It's extremely early. It's still February, for if you publish this later. So it's still February, and people are catching fish, right? And those are local guys that know what they're doing. They're resident fish. There might have been a small push, right? But there's just not, they're really good. And so what I have found is, so when I was younger and couldn't effectively catch fish the way that I can now, I would always say I'm waiting until April 1st, right? And the reason why is because April 1st is when the river was flooded with fish, right? And so and it was always a great feeling. So before that, it was always a struggle. And so catching that first fish is usually it's almost like it breaks the ice. You're now in the game. You feel like you're going to catch a lot of fish, but oftentimes that happens in early March. As the fish start to come in, there's not nearly as many fish. And usually what happens is you catch a fish and then a cold front comes in and you don't catch a lot and you end up fishing a lot, but not getting nearly as many fish. And so it kind of breaks the ice. But really the deeper you get into the run, and usually there's a time frame in late March, early April where it is just phenomenal. And so if you're a new fisherman, um, you're going to hear reports like of people catching fish now. Now, I don't discourage anybody from going out there and fishing, but I would say if you want to focus more of your attention on the best part of the run, that will provide you the most like catching experiences for somebody.
Good to know. Yeah, getting on the board, I'm sure everybody's
Yeah.
anxious to just get on the board, you know. But
It,
yeah, the timing, that's so important to know. I love that you brought up the last part of March, beginning of April. And by the
yeah.
way, this will be published on Friday, March the 1st.
Okay. Good. That's perfect time for everybody. And then do you know that um, you know, for catching fish, right? So all of March and all of April, people can catch fish. It just depends on what the river's doing, whether the river's rising, falling, whether it pushes fish out, whether it's early or not. Now, my suspect this year is that, and maybe I'll go on record for this now. My suspect is that we're going to have a little bit of an early run this year, and we've had a very mild winter. We've already had some really warm days, and so I would expect that to be a little bit earlier this year. But as soon as I make a prediction, what happens is we get a big cold front, and like you just can't control Mother Nature. Um, but I would predict a little bit of an early, at least an early start this year.
I get it. My husband's a Browns fan, and based on preseason or the first couple of games of this season, he's making predictions like we're going to be good this year, whatever. And
Right,
we had a
right.
pretty good year. I'm a Browns fan by marriage. I'm a Browns fan by marriage, so of course I'm rooting for them, but yeah, they didn't make it to the Super Bowl. You never can tell, but I like that someone with your amount of experience is just throwing something out there. We'll see if you're right.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
You guys can all laugh after the season's over when you say, "Yeah, it was it was the latest season ever." So
Well, they should join your Facebook group and then they can give you a little bit of a good-natured grief when and if you're wrong. Who
yeah,
knows? Let's hope
yeah,
you're right though, because
yeah,
people
for
seem
sure.
to really love it and it seems like people time vacations with the walleye run. What do you know about that? What do you see people doing?
Yeah, I do. A lot of people do time their vacations. Anybody that's coming from out of town, a lot of people spend just many of the weekends, like longer weekends. And I know it's a big thing, right? Like as you think about everybody coming in, it's a big tourist attraction. Even myself, right? Like I in the past have scheduled our vacations around the walleye run, right? And for me, it was scheduling them with the kids outside of those peak time frames, so I could really focus on fishing when the fish were there. And it's always, it's a great time. People will schedule that. There's lots of B&Bs, there's lots of hotels, especially on the Perrysburg side of the river. When you go across the Maumee Perrysburg Bridge, there's a ton of hotels to stay at on the Perrysburg side, and so I would recommend people to stay close by to the river.
Absolutely. Yeah, there are quite a few hotels and a growing number of them. It seems like on a State Route 795 for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
You mentioned earlier that you wrote a book about the Walleye Run. What is it called? Where can people find it?
Yeah, so there's probably two places that you can get the book. So you can get it right off my website. It's called Fishing the Maumee River Walleye Run. So really, and I published that back in 2012, so it's about 12 years old now. But it's very much it kind of goes end to end on the fishing experience, and so it's a really good book to read. Even preseason, and I know I've gotten lots of high recommendations on the book, so I would highly recommend that. You can also get it on Amazon. Do note that Amazon says it'll take a lot longer to ship. It's not accurate. You'll get it within a couple days. So they say it's like 2 weeks, but it'll come in a couple days. So either one of those locations is a great place to get it.
Good info. And if somebody picks up that book, what's the number one thing that you think they'll get out of it?
Yeah, so they'll really understand like the type of equipment to use, the locations, It really talks about courtesy on the river, what to do and what not to do. Um, and so, with so many people, as you can imagine, with people standing shoulder to shoulder, usually people are within 6 feet of each other, and even tighter, right? We fished much tighter if we know each other. Um, so, it'll really kind of explain like what's the courtesy on the river, what should you be doing, where you should be going, and what's the type of equipment. And it really kind of goes end to end into those details.
All good info. And I have not asked about safety yet. You have mentioned that there are some deep pockets, be careful with life vests, etc. Number one, do you cover safety tips in your book? And number two, can you share some safety tips today as we start to wrap this up?
Yeah, absolutely. So new to the river, and I know you're going to go out there and you're going to see not very many people wearing life jackets. Near the river, put a life jacket on. I can't stress that enough. A lot of people are wearing waders. And so it's really highly recommended that you put a wader belt on. And what a wader belt does, just so people don't that are going out there for the first time, a wader belt, if you put it on tight, it will stop. If you fall in the water, it will stop the water from filling up your waders, right? It will fill up until your waist, and you can dump your waders out. Trust me, it's huge. It's huge even if you fall, just so the water doesn't get all the way down and make your feet cold, right? So those are a couple important things. The other thing is look where people are walking and shuffle your feet and don't push it. Just do know that the deeper you get in the water, the heavier the current is. You're going to have to turn around when you come back after you've stood in one location for a long time and it's a little bit cold in the water, so your feet won't move as much. So that's really important. Just again, don't take unnecessary risk and kind of only go where other people are. Um, and definitely, like I said, life jacket, wader belt, those are critical things. I won't go in the river without a wader belt on myself. So,
Good info. Thanks for the tips. Is there anything else you'd like to share as we start to wrap this up?
yeah, I think just one thing is for anybody that's new to fishing, the walleye right now have been there are just so many walleye, both in Lake Erie and in the rivers, in all of the tributaries that are touching Lake Erie. And so, if you're thinking about fishing, the quantity of fish in the rivers and in the lakes right now are at an all-time high. And so, there's not a better time to try something new when you're going to have a higher success rate, just because there's so many fish in the river. And so I would encourage anybody to say, hey, if you're going to try to pick it up this year, right? And in the last couple of years, it's been phenomenal fishing, and it's been phenomenal fishing for a long time. Now, again, everything's dependent on the weather, the river conditions, but as far as the fish are going to be in the river, and there's going to be lots of them, more than ever before.
Wow, that's exciting. It's not like shooting fish in a barrel, but like fishing fish out of a river, I guess.
Yeah.
But that's exciting. Thank you for the predictions and the positive attitude that you have about walleye fishing. I think that I got more out of this interview than I planned. I thought we'd be talking about parks and which ones are good to fish at, but I got so much more. Thank you so much, Brian, for being here on the Perrysburg Podcast. Take care.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kim.
Thanks again to Brian Miller for being my guest today on the Perrysburg Podcast, episode 32. I hope you enjoyed hearing about the Walleye Run and the Maumee River. Fishing is one of the reasons that people like living in Perrysburg. If you like fishing too, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Now, I want to say something as a spectator. Fishing is a sport, and I am a spectator. What I like to do, I've been doing this since I moved here back in 2007. I like to ride my bike down to the Perrysburg Maumee Bridge, stand on the sidewalk, look over the side at the river, and watch and see what boats are going by. Motorboats, kayaks, canoes, whatever's going on. And then I also like to see the people lined up in the river with their waders on, fishing, and just see it, witness it. It's a spectator sport sometimes. I am a spectator. I really enjoy watching all of the men, women, and children who are out there fishing, just standing shoulder to shoulder. It's like a scene from 200 years ago. People are not looking at their cell phones. They are enjoying fishing. It is like an old-fashioned thing to do, and it's still fun today. And while I stand on that bridge, if you can imagine, sometimes the fishermen will come up And I know they're walking to their cars, wherever they may be parked, and they'll pass me wearing their waders and they'll have a stringer of fish. It is amazing to witness. So if you would like to witness or be a spectator for the Maumee River Walleye Run, check that out by going to the Perrysburg Maumee Bridge and stand on the sidewalk and look over the side. It is really cool. At this time, I'd like to encourage you to check out the show notes on perrysburgpodcast.com. In the show notes today, you will find a link to Brian Miller's website, which again is maumeeriverwalleyerun.com. That's where you can find a link to buy his book. It is called Fishing the Maumee River Walleye Run by Brian Miller. In the show notes, you'll also find a list of those parks and places that you can go fishing here in Perrysburg, and you'll also find a link to the YouTube channel for this podcast. If you didn't know, there is a video version of this episode. Audio goes on the podcast players, the video version goes on YouTube. Go ahead and check that out. youtube.com/@Perrysburg Podcast. I also have something on the website, perrysburgpodcast.com, where you can sign up for the newsletter for this podcast. So again, go to perrysburgpodcast.com and sign up for the newsletter today. I'll have a weekly newsletter starting in March 2024. That's this month. Today's March 1st. All right, if you know someone who might like to learn about the Maumee River Walleye Run, please share this episode with them. And if you like this podcast, please subscribe to or follow the Perrysburg Podcast on your favorite podcast player and YouTube to get each new episode right when it comes out. Thanks for listening today. Have a great weekend. I'll talk to you next week.